Lord of the Rings, clearly one of the most celebrated franchises of all time. It is movies that you need to go back and watch every year.
It's my rainy day movie pick.
It is. You're going to run out of words talking about how utterly brilliant. All three of the trilogy were nominated for Best Picture. The final one, Return of the King, holds the record for the most Academy Award wins in the history of film. It's shared with two other films. No other film in history has ever won more Academy Awards than Lord of the Rings, Return of the King. It's celebrated. But it's also well known that Peter Jackson and the studio worked very closely together. And Peter Jackson took a lot of notes from the studio. Peter Jackson sometimes, he took a lot of the notes from the studio. Sometimes he pushed back and got his thing. It was a really good collaborative effort. One of the things that apparently he was getting pushed from the studio on that I'd never heard of before was the fact that out of the four main Hobbits, the studio really wanted him to kill one of them off. They really wanted Peter Jackson to kill one of them off and say, you know what? I guess they felt they needed to raise the stakes or something like that. And of course, Peter Jackson ultimately dug in his heels and he said, no. Now, this comes to us from the folks over at IndieWire who wrote the following. IGN reports that Boyd and Monaghan, now these are the two guys who played Merry and Pippin, and they've got their own new podcast that they're doing together. They just launched a new podcast. But anyway,
nice. Okay.
They just revealed a time when Peter Jackson was being pressured from above to have one of the four hobbits die in the film, even though they survived in the books. Luckily, Jackson didn't succumb to the demands of the producers, and if he did, Monaghan said it most likely would have been Merry on the chopping block, because he pointed out that Pippin had too close of a relationship with Gandalf, so they weren't going to do that. Yeah. They obviously weren't going to kill Samwise, and obviously they weren't going to kill Frodo, so it was going to be him. Now look, it wouldn't have ultimately been that big of a deal, because, there's not a Lord of the Rings 4, and I'm sure, he would have made it into the final film, but what we would have missed out on is, I don't think there's a moment in movies that brings me to tears nearly as much as one of the 17 endings of Lord of the Rings, Return of the King. When the battle has been won, all of Gondor is gathered, on the top cliff rock, and the king now comes through, he's being greeted by everybody, and he greets the hobbits, and they start to bow to the king, and the king says, "My friends, you bow to no one." I'm almost tearing up just repeating, I kid you not, I am almost tearing up right now just saying the line. When the king says to these hobbits, "My friends, you bow to no one," and then the king of Gondor bows down, and then the camera pans back in this wide shot where you see all of Middle-earth kneeling and bowing to these four hobbits. I'm getting emotional just talking about it. Okay? I'm getting emotional just talking about it. And then to have this shot that I have up here on screen right now, when you have these four hobbits, and by the way, all four of these performers played it perfectly. Like, they're all
perfect
stunned
casting
and moved.
I love them.
And like, if they had killed off one of those, it would have changed this scene for me. And I love this scene. So yeah, but listen, one of the things that Monaghan said was, Peter told them that it's in the books that they live, and we got to stay true to the books. And I'm like, okay, but Peter, come on, you changed a lot that was in the books, but that's fine too. Tom Bombadil, anybody? But anyway, that was there. I'm glad they didn't kill him off. I'm glad that is one of the areas that Peter Jackson stood firm. What do you think when you hear about this?
I'm so glad he
pressure?
didn't give in. And that's like we were talking about, how the creatives have their vision, and sometimes the higher ups are like, it'll be great. Sometimes just trust your artist. Trust your artist. And I'm so glad they didn't. I love those guys. Oh my God. It's my rainy day movie. I love those films, and please don't ever kill them off. No. Yeah,
I'm glad they didn't do that. Anyway, the question is for you guys. What do you think about, really, ultimately, at the end of the day, I'm sure they wouldn't have killed him off until way into the third film, so it wouldn't have changed an awful lot, but I would have lost out on that last scene. How do you guys feel about it? Do you think a nice, like, for people who knew the books, it would have been a shock if they killed one of them? Maybe that could have been good. I don't know. I'm glad they didn't change it. How about you? Jump down into the comment section below and let us know your thoughts.